The first entry in a video game series is hard to get right. Hardware may make it outdated, later ideas can cause the series to change direction, and unlike a sequel, there's nothing to build on. Even though most first games are great, they usually get quickly overshadowed by those that follow it. While there certainly are great video game franchises that find their footing on their first try, none of them stand out to me quite as much as Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. Ace Attorney started when series creator Shu Takumi was approached with the opportunity to create any type of game he wanted to after finishing work on Dino Crisis 2. Takumi was always interested in mystery stories and decided that the game should give players the opportunity to solve a homicide case as a private investigator known as Phoenix Wright. However, since so much of the game's activity revolved around finding contradictions, Takumi decided it would be best to change Phoenix to a lawyer instead. This meant the core gameplay would mainly consist of cross-examining witnesses to find and point out contradictions, which would in turn reveal the truth behind the case. Takumi also intended to make the game simple enough so that even his mother could understand it, which is great since I feel like I'm always playing games that put too much of a burden on the player. But, like am I supposed to move, or like does a fly poke onto me, or is it just like do I jump or anything, or... The game begins with players taking the role of Phoenix Wright, a rookie defense attorney on his first case with the assistance of his mentor, Mia Fey. They work together to defend Phoenix's childhood friend, Larry Butts, who was wrongfully accused of murder. That's basically all there is to this case. When you think of Ace Attorney cases, a lot of the ones that may come to mind are full of these long investigations and plot twists, where one like this is just like, here's the murderer, prove it. It is by no means what many would consider a definitive Ace Attorney case. It shows the culprit committing the crime as soon as you start it, and it doesn't feature a significant character as a prosecutor or an investigation segment. But while this basic formula sounds like a complaint, I honestly think it's a great approach to the first case for the series. It does such a good job of throwing players right into the action instead of bogging down the experience with a bunch of exposition and investigating. Instead of focusing too much on courtroom dynamics like later cases, the exclusion of a significant prosecutor simply allows players to focus more on the case at hand and the core gameplay of finding contradictions. While showing the culprit at the beginning may come off as counterintuitive, it's a good way to ease players into the excitement of cross-examination as they get an idea of what it can lead to. Having this be the first case for not just the player, but Phoenix as well, makes it a great tutorial. This trial has numerous instances of Phoenix's mentor Mia explaining how to make the trial progress and what certain mechanics like the court record are. That, mixed with the lack of an investigation or main prosecutor, makes this an incredibly simple case. However, that's exactly what it needed to be. Without that simplicity, players may not have latched on to the game as strong as they would have otherwise. While from a narrative perspective, this case is certainly lacking, the gameplay more than makes up for it. It instantly appeals to so many of the simple yet significant design philosophies that Ace Attorney is known for. These design choices are of course the audio and visuals. The series is iconic for its loud speech bubbles, aggressive pointing, and fantastic music, and for a good reason. The importance of all three of these things can be seen in a simple cross-examination sequence. A cross-examination works by witnesses giving a testimony and players being able to respond to each line the witness says. This can be through pressing a line to get more information, which is shown through a "Hold it!" or presenting a piece of evidence, which is signified by an "Objection!" Every "Hold it!" increases the tension, and it really communicates the idea that the player is in charge as they inch closer to the truth. This continuous build-up of intensity is propelled to another level with the "Objection!" as long as you present the very specific piece of evidence in response to a very specific line of testimony. When done right, the music stops after the aggressive yell and point that comes out from Phoenix. After a brief explanation of his argument, the music picks up again at a higher level of intensity. It's clear that what makes this use of audio and visual design so great is the atmosphere that it builds, but what makes it even more impactful is the way that it was all constructed by the player. It was the player who decided to press the witness, then object to their statement, and stop the music. The game does such a good job of making the player's decisions matter through this atmosphere, and the fact that if you make the wrong decision, you risk having to start over. But outside of the core gameplay that this case and every other one in the series has, the first Turnabout really doesn't have much going for it outside of an introduction. As for the story itself in this case, it's pretty forgettable, which is fine considering how that isn't exactly the selling point this time. The first Turnabout is more about character and gameplay introductions. As for the characters we're introduced to in this case, there's Phoenix Wright, a young lawyer passionate about defending the innocent and finding the truth, as well as his childhood friend Larry Butts, an airhead that brings trouble with him everywhere he goes. The only other major character in this case is Phoenix's mentor, Mia Fey, who has a strong will to believe in her clients and to push on to the bitter end. A lot of Mia's philosophies seem to really shape Phoenix's career, so I'm really interested to see more about her as the game goes on, so let's go ahead and start the next case, Turnabout Sisters. Oh, I knew I should have been more interested in Larry. Killing off Mia, one of the most important characters in the game, one of the 4 main characters plastered throughout the manual and back of the box, in the second case is one of the boldest decisions you could have possibly made. I get that the first case was meant to be training for Phoenix and the player, and that case 2 really lets them loose, but did you have to do that by killing Mia? Couldn't she have just been working on a separate case or something? I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a bad move on the team's end, but more so just a bold one that I'm surprised to see how they'll handle. I'm sure that is the case and the rest of the game goes on, it'll make more sense though. Anyways, let's keep playing. Early on in this case, we're introduced to Maya Fey, a spirit medium in training who's also Mia's younger sister. She seems to be pretty important considering that she's plastered all over the game's artwork, even looking like a sidekick to Phoenix. After a very brief introduction, she gets arrested on suspicion of Mia's murder, and history repeats itself unfortunately. We also get introduced to Detective Dick Gumshoe around this point, who is just a dumb and stupid dumb guy that we see a lot. He's somewhat of a comedic relief character that we run into in every case from this point on, and I think he's a great addition to the cast. Recurring characters like him and Maya help make the story feel more connected throughout each case, and they provide some quality tomfoolery. Gumshoe tells us about another recurring character that we'll see on the day of the trial, an esteemed prosecutor named Miles Edgeworth. Apparently he has a perfect win record, but so do I, and he's another character that appears in the game's artwork, so chances are something tragic will happen to him, and we won't have much to worry about. Outside of an introduction to some important new characters, this case also introduces us to the investigation aspect of the game. When you're not in court, you spend time gathering evidence and information at the scene of the crime and other related locations. This mostly consists of talking to characters and examining backgrounds, making for gameplay that I think helps each case stand out on its own. This really helps players get immersed in cases as they familiarize themselves with its respective characters and settings, which helps establish a greater sense of identity to each of the game's specific cases. These segments also provide a more relaxed experience since they lack things like penalties and cross-examinations. Instead, you just progress through the game by talking to people and clicking things. At least until you've examined everything in the game up to that point and you can't progress because you didn't present a completely random piece of evidence to a completely random character. As dumb as it sounds, I always liked being able to examine practically everything that catches my eye, even when it's something unnecessary. It really shows the love and care that the developers put into the game, since some items reveal certain incredibly trivial information about a character or lead to funny interactions. I thought some of Phoenix's internal dialogue and the bellboy in Turnabout Sisters were pretty funny as well, so despite how much I thought I wouldn't like this case, I'm actually enjoying it so far. We then get to the trial, consisting of basically the same gameplay we'd seen in the first Turnabout, except it holds your hand a little less. I'd say what really sets this trial apart are the characters. We get to see more of the bellboy, and April May is a great first minor antagonist with her exaggerated two-faced personality, and most notably, it's when we finally get to see Miles Edgeworth. Though this trial doesn't reveal too much of his character, it still serves as a great introduction to him. Players know exactly who they're up against, and that he's likely to play some larger role in the story, considering how he's briefly yet memorably talked about. It's clear that we're likely to see more about his character as the game goes on, but what we do see is a fantastic foil to Phoenix. In the same way that Phoenix fights so hard for acquittal, Edgeworth does so for conviction. They have two incredibly strong senses of justice, but they portray them in different ways. It's the clash that comes from their courtroom dynamic and the way that their rivalry tell us about who each character is that makes even the most throwaway trial segment so entertaining. But all in all, this is another great case so far. Notice how I said so far. We eventually get introduced to the culprit in this case, a businessman named Wright, and he is one of the lamest villains they could have possibly introduced. There really isn't enough tension surrounding his purpose in the story to make the players super interested in him. For the most part, the game just goes, you found out there's another bad guy, here he is, here's why he's bad. But there's barely any build-up or excitement around this introduction, especially considering that the game literally shows that he did it in the opening cutscene of this case. He really doesn't have much of a motive behind his actions outside of power and greed, and I wouldn't say that he's dislikable in a good way like some antagonists, but I feel like what makes him really such a hated villain is that someone as mediocre as him is the reason that Mia, one of the most important characters in the whole game, was killed. However, Mia's death is somewhat remedied as Maya gets the ability to channel her spirit. I can't make up my mind on whether this is smart or lazy or both, but I can decide that it's weird. Wright is far and above my biggest issue with this case, but outside of that, I think Turnabout Sisters serves as another great introductory segment. While the first Turnabout was more of an introduction to the gameplay, Turnabout Sisters shows us what we can expect later on. We get a balance of investigations and trials, meet recurring characters like Maya, Gumshoe, and Edgeworth, and get an idea of future story beats. For example, Wright eventually abuses his power and decides to have the courts unjustly accuse Phoenix, which is an early showcase of the game's themes of true justice versus the failings of the legal system. Marvin Grossberg, Mia's mentor, also introduces us to the DL6 incident, which becomes a major plot point later on. It's because of how great an introduction to the story that Turnabout Sisters is that I think some people tend to be harsh on its successor, Turnabout Samurai. Turnabout Samurai is considered by many to be, excuse my French, remplissage. Unlike previous characters, the ones introduced in this case have no relevance to the overarching story of this game. We aren't introduced to anyone from the main cast's life, like with Larry or Edgeworth, and the new characters don't give significant information like Grossberg with DL6, nor can we expect to see them in future cases like with Gumshoe and Maya. This is easily the most self-contained entry that we have seen thus far, but as bad as this case may sound, I honestly think it's a great inclusion. Players have already got past an introduction to the gameplay and story, so I think Turnabout Samurai serves as a nice break that really lets the player loose. Now that we've finally gotten into the rhythm of things, we're rewarded with what feels like a full Ace Attorney experience with minimal hand-holding and the greater involvement of the main characters introduced in Turnabout Sisters. I particularly like Maya's role in this case, considering how this is the first time that she's involved in an investigation. She's a super likable character that we finally get to see more of, and she and Phoenix have great chemistry together. Having her present for the investigation makes those segments more entertaining since Phoenix has a more well-known and consistently appearing character to bounce off of. The case starts with Maya watching the Steel Samurai Warrior of Neo Old Tokyo, a popular show targeted towards kids. The actor who plays the Steel Samurai, Will Powers, then gets arrested and accused of murder of his co-star. And guess who gets to defend him in court? This time the investigation takes place at a film studio, which is super neat. Like, this is such a fun setting compared to hotel, law office, other law office. While those locations certainly got the job done, having a case that's more focused on being a fun experience being set in an interesting location is a great fit. There are also some funny characters in this case too, like Wendy Old Bag, a windy old bag that talks so fast she can auto-advance text, and Salmonella, a director who is as chronically online as he is sweaty. But as much as I like this case, I do understand why some people don't. If you really just care about the main story and hope to see the overarching plot advance, then this is one case you just have to suffer through. After finally getting an idea of what the story is like with Turnabout Sisters, you dive straight into a case that is just haha silly fun, which is something that Ace Attorney does great, but just not what some may want. There are also complaints about having to move throughout multiple locations just so you can end up at one spot you need to be, but if you don't have the patience for that, like, why are you playing a game that is mostly just reading? Like, dang, I want to read this book, but if I turn the pages, that's really going to break the pacing. While I can understand why people dislike the investigation for this case, I think the trial segments are really solid. I feel like Turnabout Samurai is a lot less straightforward than the previous cases, which makes it really fun to see the mystery unfold in the courtroom. Because this case can be so convoluted and incriminating for the defendant, it actually puts Phoenix in a position in which he almost doubts his client. Eventually, Mia comes back to remind him to believe in Will Powers when nobody else does, which is a story beat that I think this case does really well. Phoenix's internal conflict allows the game to further examine Mia's philosophy while also being a justifiable reason to bring her back again. Instead of neglecting Maya's ability to channel her or cramming her into the story in places that seem superfluous, her involvement here feels significant and reminds us why she is such an important character in the first place. This reminder from Mia also serves to reinforce the values of our characters as we get ready to head into the final case. Another scene showing a similar purpose happens towards the end of the final trial segment, but this time it focuses on Edgeworth. At this point in the case, Edgeworth knows that he's prosecuting the wrong person, but instead of being dead set on a conviction like usual, he tries to help bring the true culprit to justice. I think this was a fantastic move since, thus far, Edgeworth looks to be like a rival who cares more about winning than the truth, but this scene hints that there's more to his character than that. It shows us that his desire for conviction stems from his hatred for crime rather than pride, and develops his character as he starts to overcome his issues with the justice system that the game has been implying. And similarly to the earlier segment with Mia where she reminds Phoenix about the importance of believing in their client, it reinforces a core theme of the game, the battle between winning and truth. Though Phoenix and Edgeworth both fight for different things in the courtroom, we see that their motive of uncovering the truth ultimately aligns as the game goes on. On top of that, the end of the case also gives us more hints about the relationship between Phoenix and Edgeworth before the events of the game. So in the end, I would argue Turnabout Samurai is a great inclusion. While it isn't as connected to the main plot of the game like Turnabout Sisters, I feel like it more than makes up for it. The characters allow for some fun interactions, it has an interesting setting, and it even serves as a build-up to the final case in the way that it develops characters and reinforces themes. With that build-up out of the way, let's go ahead and start the game's last main case, Turnabout
Turnabout. 'Goodbyes. 'Turnabout. 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 'Goodbyes. 'Turnabout
Dang, looks like tragedy struck Edgeworth. Wait! Tragedy struck Edgeworth! The case begins with Miles Edgeworth getting framed, which is certainly another bold narrative decision. But after playing just a bit of the first investigation segment of this case, it's clear that this was the right move. It's easy for players to get heavily invested in this case, since it puts more at stake considering a main character is the defendant instead of a new character that we are unfamiliar with. Freeing Edgeworth of his role as the game's main prosecutor also allows the story to focus more on his character outside of the motives and actions that we see in the courtroom. Putting him in the stressful role of the defendant only furthers this case's development of his character, as it puts him in difficult situations that we wouldn't see otherwise. Though he is reluctant at first, Edgeworth eventually agrees to let Phoenix represent him in court, and we begin our investigation at Gourd Lake, the scene of the crime. While this certainly isn't as much of an interesting location as something like Global Studios from Turnabout Samurai, it gets the job done and allows the player to focus more so on the case itself rather than where it took place. But even then, I do think it's a little more engaging than other settings. There's rumors of the lake being home to a mysterious cryptid named Gordy, there's a sketchy boat shop, and we even get to visit the police precinct after talking with Gumshoe. Interestingly, Gumshoe's involvement in this case is a little more engaging than usual. Instead of just filling the role of the lovable goofball detective, he also reflects themes we see from Phoenix and Edgeworth. For example, in the same way that Edgeworth acted out of his role as a prosecutor at the end of Turnabout Samurai to ensure a just outcome, Gumshoe neglects certain implications of his role as a detective in this case in hopes of a rightful acquittal. As a detective, he is obligated to be more beneficial to the prosecution, however, his investigations are intentionally more helpful to the defense in this case. While a similar message was seen briefly in Turnabout Samurai when he stopped the Mafia from attacking Phoenix and Maya, he exhibits the game's themes more thoroughly in this case in hopes of Edgeworth being justly acquitted. Maya is another recurring character that gets more serious in this final case. She serves as a lighthearted companion that encourages Phoenix throughout the rest of the game, especially when she channels her sister Mia. However, she is unable to do so in this case. She has trouble coming to terms with this shortcoming, which causes her to take actions out of fear of being useless. Ironically, these actions only prove how integral she is to each case that she works. Multiple times in Turnabout Goodbyes, Maya risks her well-being in order to ensure that the case is brought to a proper conclusion, even if it results in her being held in contempt of court. Not only does Mia's absence cause Maya to mirror themes we've seen from Phoenix, Gumshoe, and Edgeworth, but it also shows character growth. Though Phoenix and Maya talk as if they're lost without Mia's help in this case, their actions show the opposite. This case subtly shows how far they've come as both of them act in ways that show their growth and ability to handle a case without the help of a mentor. Once we reach our first trial segment, we're told that we'll be going up against Manfred von Karma, a ruthless prosecutor with a perfect record. Von Karma is the prosecutor who mentored Edgeworth and is basically a much harsher and corrupt version of him. It's an odd move to introduce a character that's this important to the story at such a late point in the game, but it works surprisingly well. Like, first off, could you imagine Winston Payne, the prosecutor for the Goo Goo Gaga baby trials, being the opponent at the game's climax? On top of Von Karma having a reputation fitting for such an intense case, he already fits right in regarding the narrative's themes. He fights incredibly hard in court like other characters we see, but what makes him different is he lacks a pure motive. Unlike Phoenix defending others due to his loyalty or Edgeworth prosecuting out of his hatred for crime, Von Karma acts only out of pride. The dynamic that comes from this difference in values doesn't create as much tension between the characters we saw with Phoenix and Edgeworth. However, it instead builds tension around the case itself, and the same can be said about Von Karma's complete and total control over a trial. Multiple times throughout this case, he just takes control of things a little too much and puts Phoenix as well as the player in some tough situations. This of course continues to show Phoenix's growth as an attorney as he manages to stand his ground against Von Karma, but it also creates a more difficult and engaging trial for the player, which is fitting for such an important conclusion. As for the story itself in this case, I'd say that it's easily the most interesting and engaging one we've seen thus far. It finally connects a lot of stuff we've heard from previous cases, such as Wright's and Edgeworth's past, as well as the briefly mentioned DL6 incident from Turnabout Sisters. We find out that when Edgeworth was a kid, he hoped to become a defense attorney like his father and even defended Phoenix in a classroom trial. Knowing this recontextualizes our two main characters and reinforces the theme of truth transcending the boundaries of roles considering how Miles was the victim. However, Edgeworth moved away shortly after this as a result of his father's death in the DL6 incident. DL6 is what motivates the key players of Turnabout Goodbyes, separated our protagonists as children, and turned Edgeworth into who he is today. After the man who was supposedly responsible for his father's death was acquitted, Edgeworth began hating defense attorneys and studied under Von Karma to become a prosecutor. However, Edgeworth also believes that he is responsible for the tragedy that occurred 15 years ago, and eventually decides to confess his guilt at the end of the trial. That confession is where Phoenix really starts to shine in this case. He's the only one that believes in Edgeworth's innocence enough to fight for it, which creates one of the best sequences in the entire series in the way that it showcases the culmination of Phoenix's character arc. For instance, 15 years prior, Edgeworth argued for Phoenix's innocence when nobody else would. Now Phoenix starts doing the same for him, exhibiting the reason why he became a lawyer in the first place, along with his fully realized sense of justice. This also shows his development in the way that he mastered what Mia taught him about having faith in his client. Not only does he believe in the innocence that not even his client does, but he does so unshakably, unlike in other instances. It's this strong determination and belief that results in the truth of DL6 coming to light, which is undoubtedly the most exhilarating part of the entire game. Also, I really like that this huge revelation only happened because Gumshoe has a metal detector. That's just kind of funny. The trial ends with Edgeworth's acquittal and Von Karma's downfall, both of which feeling like a reward to the players for uncovering the truth. But the game still continues from there, most notably with what happens with Maya. After the post-trial celebration, Maya leaves Phoenix a letter saying that she's temporarily leaving Wright & Co. law offices to return home and become a better spirit medium. Much like other interactions we have with Maya in this case, her departure allows for a development of a more serious character contrast to how she is usually depicted. In just this one case, we see Maya go from a comedic sidekick to a maturing character who is trying to live up to her aspirations. This scene also builds anticipation around the continuation of the series, as it has mostly wrapped up things by now but still leaves room for future storylines. So in the end, Turnabout Goodbyes is just about as perfect of a conclusion that Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney could have had. It tied so many things together, such as the importance of the DL6 incident and the relationship between Phoenix and Edgeworth, and it did an amazing job of exploring the game's themes about justice and truth. It was all done in such an unforgettable way that delivered on everything it needed to in the way that it gave proper attention to every story element necessary and signified their importance. Turnabout Goodbyes is like a perfect eruption of everything that the game has been building up to, and is without a doubt one of the best cases in the entire series. So that was Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney was originally released on the Game Boy Advance in Japan only, and got re-released elsewhere on the DS a couple of years later. To commemorate the DS release, an extra case titled Rise from the Ashes was added, and they could not have made it stand out more if they tried. This is certainly an odd inclusion, especially considering how basically everything was wrapped up in Turnabout Goodbyes. All of the characters went through their arc, and no mysteries were left unsolved, so basically everything about this additional case outside of our returning main characters is brand new. While I definitely think this works to its benefit, it also can make Rise from the Ashes a bit tedious to go through. It introduces a ton of plot points, characters, and even new game mechanics that can make the case a little overbearing at times. On top of that, this case is 7.5 hours long, which is an insane jump in length. Previous cases would steadily progress in length, with each one being reasonably longer than the last, but this increase can be daunting to some players. Like Rise from the Ashes is longer than both Turnabout Samurai and Turnabout Goodbyes combined. I've played Warrior Land 4s that are shorter than this case. The case begins with players getting introduced to Lana Skye, the defendant and chief prosecutor. The game does a good job of introducing her, since it makes it clear that she's hiding something that we'll see later on. She even rejects our defense and pleads guilty, but she ends up with it per the request of her sister Emma. Emma Skye is basically this case's replacement for Maya, since she left at the end of Turnabout Goodbyes. It's a little odd to have that role filled by someone else, and I definitely prefer Maya, but Emma is a great fit that helps make this case stand apart more. She also creates some fun banter between her and Phoenix, making for a fitting one-time replacement for Maya. As the case goes on, we get introduced to a bunch of other completely new characters that serve some significance to this case. There's Angel Starr, a former detective turned lunch saleswoman, Mike Meekins, a clumsy and panicked police officer, Jake Marshall, another former detective who became a security guard, and Damon Gant, the charismatic chief of police. We also finally find out what this thing is, the Blue Badger, who is basically the mascot of the game's policing system. I think this is the best case-exclusive cast we've seen thus far, since it's filled with characters that have an intriguing past, likable comedic reliefs, and a villain that's just as satisfying to take down as Von Karma. But unlike case-specific characters we've seen previously, the ones we see in Rise from the Ashes are much more important to the story of the case. Each of them have a strong connection to what's going on that helps players get a better understanding of this case's significance, which does a great job of keeping this long episode engaging. But as beneficial as that storytelling technique is, it also means that players have to go through a ton of exposition. Unlike Turnabout Goodbyes, Rise from the Ashes has no previous installments building up to it, which means a large portion of the case consists of long introductions to the story and characters that can make it a little more tedious to go through. While these long expositions are essential so the story can be as fully developed as it is, it's hard to admit that they're particularly engaging. On top of getting introduced to all of these new characters and storylines, players also have to solve multiple mysteries surrounding the case. Similarly to Turnabout Goodbyes, Rise from the Ashes is a case that's heavily tied to another legal incident from a couple of years ago, this time with a case known as the SL9 incident. But unlike the DL6 incident, we get no introduction to SL9 prior to the case that it's tied to, meaning we have to find out what it is, how it connects to the current case, and why it's important. On top of that, we also have to solve the main crime, which is actually a cover-up for another incident, which actually occurred simultaneously with another crime, creating a total of 4 incidents that players have to solve in just one case. This creates such a convoluted story that's hard to keep track of, making Rise from the Ashes a difficult yet rewarding case to go through. But as daunting as the complexity of this case can be, that's not even the worst part about it. The Blue Badger is involved with so many of these incidents, like these characters could just be grabbing a drink and lo and behold, he'd be there. But what makes that so bad is that anytime you try to solve something related to the Blue Badger, it just keeps on playing this incredibly annoying song the whole time and it gets so old so fast. Like this cutscene you have to just watch so many times makes me just wanna... Much like that cutscene with the Blue Badger, a lot of gameplay elements were added to this case that couldn't have been done until the DS release. Since players investigate with Emma, an aspiring forensic scientist, there's parts where you use the touchscreen for things like fingerprinting, and even though it sounds unnecessarily gimmicky, I think they're neat inclusions. It makes investigating a little more captivating and unique, which is good for such a long case. And while it came off as daunting at first, I'd actually say that this case's length is fairly warranted. If the case were shorter, it wouldn't have been able to give proper attention to so many story beats. While this of course refers to everything new that we are introduced to, it also further develops characters and themes seen throughout the rest of the game. For example, this case gave a lot of attention to Edgeworth's development after the events of the main game. Turnabout Goodbyes was a case that recontextualizes Edgeworth to the players, as well as other characters in the game, including Edgeworth himself even. After learning the truth about his past, he starts questioning his identity and realizes how harmful his discarded views of justice were. Edgeworth uses his reformed view of justice to steer the case into a virtuous direction, even cooperating with Phoenix at times. Edgeworth's role in this case not only feels like a natural progression of his character, but also serves to mirror themes that we see with Lana Skye, this case's defendant. Both of them became bound to the corruption of the legal system due to their desire to make up for their past actions. The way this case showcases their development and slowly reveals the truth behind what's going on creates one of the best storylines in the entire series. It's full of suspenseful plot twists, thematic depth about breaking free of the past and the importance of true justice, and concludes with the satisfaction of taking down this case's villain and seeing Lana move forward. So while Rise from the Ashes can be a little tedious and daunting, I find that it ultimately more than makes up for it with its fantastic self-contained story and is definitely one of the best cases in the entire series. So in the end, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is what I would consider to be a perfect first entry. It's simple, but still manages to captivate players in a case's plot twists. It's funny, but still provides plenty of depth and seriousness. It tells a complete story, but still leaves room for sequels. The game does a fantastic job of introducing us to the world, gameplay loop, and lovable cast of characters that we can expect to see in later entries. At the same time, it manages to tell a great self-contained story full of well-written dynamics, themes, and scenarios. Of course, it's still a flawed game with its fair share of issues, and I wouldn't say that this is my favorite Ace Attorney game or even my favorite first game in a series, but it does a perfect job of being what it needs to be, an introduction. It sets up the rest of the series perfectly and does a great job of reeling players in all while feeling like a complete experience on its own, which is why Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is a perfect first entry.